We, as Chicago Bulls fans, have already started the discussion about who to trade, what to trade for, who's getting sent out, who's going to stay. One of those guys in particular, we talked about Zach Lavine. It is being reported by Brian Windhorst that there is still nothing he is hearing on the trade market for Zach Lavine. And then in the show, we talk about Montes Buzelis wanting to emulate Paul George. Y'all know we're going to talk about it all, break it down, but you gotta hear the music first.
Cognac, gang.
Bulls podcast with the Cognac Boys. I'm Cognac Boy Bobby, and I'm holding it down on today's daily episode. If you tuned in with me today, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell as well. Ladies and gentlemen, all the trade talk that we've been going through, the discussions that we've been having in regards to who should get traded, who should be sent out, what can potentially be the return if we trade said player, what can potentially you might have to add if you do trade said player. Now let's focus on Zach Lavine. Zach Lavine, we understand that last year he requested a trade, suffered through an injury that ended his season early. Never really heard anything after that. Never really heard anything during the offseason, in the playoffs, heading into this season, and still nothing right now. It is being reported by Brian Windhorst. You know what I'm saying? Well, he pretty much discussed it on the Hoop Collective podcast. He pretty much came in and said, and quote, he's having an excellent year, talking about Zach Lavine. We know that he's been on the trade block for a year now at the least, yet I hear nothing about Lavine on the trade market, and I don't think it's because the Bulls aren't interested in trading him. When Wendy went on to talk about the apron rules, he said this, and quote, Zach Lavine is playing well enough to be traded. If this was 2 years ago, I think there's a good chance he would be traded, end quote. Tim McMahon added on right after that, end quote. 2 years ago, the Mavericks tried to trade for him before they got Kyrie, and the Bulls weren't interested, end quote. Now, when you think about the difficulty to move Zach Lavine, in one sense, you could absolutely say it sounds a bit crazy, right? The man is averaging 22 points per game this season, has been healthy this season. He's shooting from the field 50%, from the three-point line 43%. He has not gotten in the way of these young guys. He has not been a problem in the locker room. He has been truly a professional for the Chicago Bulls with his approach. That's why it kind of sounds crazy on one end. But then if you evaluate the other things that come with it, you kind of understand the discussion about it, or why some teams may be, standoffish to the idea of trading for Zach Lavine. You kind of understand it in a sense. There's already the stigma that Zach Lavine has to carry, that he's not a winning player. There's already the stigma of Zach Lavine that he pretty much can't stay healthy. I wouldn't necessarily say that people don't believe that he can remain healthy for this season, but you definitely have to believe there has been some type of thought or some type of consideration when you talk about Zach Lavine as the player. You have to look at all things considered, and those include injury history. And then you go on and you continue the conversation, and then you get to the money aspect of Zach Lavine. When you talk about Zach Lavine right now, my man's getting paid over 40 mil. Next year, 45, and then the following year, it's like 48, 49. That's a lot of money to trade for. Now, I'm not saying that teams can't get it done. You know what I'm saying? But it's something that most teams are now going to consider more so than in the past, than right now. Like, I think it was a great point that Wendy pointed out, that saying if this was 2 years ago, before all those CBA rules changed and the apron 1, and then you cross into apron 2. Yes, before all those things became major factors in the contract negotiations and team structure and managing your salary cap, Zach Lavine could have been gone. But most teams are not really urgent when it comes to going over that second apron for a guy like Zach Lavine. You kind of understand it a little bit. But then you can push back on that idea with saying, hey, you guys possibly paid so many of these young players 30 million per year. You can make something happen. You know what I'm saying? My man's Hayes gave me the alley-oop, and that's something you have to consider. Some of these role players, depending on where you look around the NBA, they getting 25, 30 million. So you can kind of see if that can make it work. But you still got to understand that a lot of these owners and these guys, these GMs that's managing their salary cap for their respective team, they're not going to want to take on such a large contract for a guy that a lot of people don't have confidence in. We are Bulls fans. We like Zach Lavine, or at least most of us. We've seen Zach Lavine heat up. We've seen Zach Lavine, you know what I'm saying, do bonehead stuff as well. But most people like me, I like his game. I'm not saying it's a game that's going to translate into championships for the Chicago Bulls, but I do like the player. I think he can contribute to a winning team, just not as the first option. That's just my personal opinion on it. Now, I will say this, with this whole situation and what has taken place and what continues to be said, I ask you all, do you guys think that Rich Paul might have to intervene in this a little bit? Do you think that, because you know Rich Paul has a history of kind of like forcing his way for his clients, and Zach Lavine is one of his clients. You know what I'm saying? Do you guys think that Rich Paul might intervene if Zach Lavine still wants to get traded? And that's another thing we got to ask. Does Zach Lavine still want to get traded? I know in one of the recent interviews, probably a couple weeks ago, he was talking about, man, I just had my second child here. We settling in. What does that mean? Does that mean that the idea of moving on from Chicago has changed, or is Zach Lavine good where he at? That's a question we got to see. But even if he still or now has come back around to where you reel him back in with the organization, is that what the organization want to do? Does the organization want to hold on to Zach Lavine? I don't know. Because right now it kind of seems like these guys are still filtering out, trying to figure it out. Who, you know what I'm saying? Is Vooch gonna bring in some value to us? Is Zach Lavine gonna still bring in some value to us? Because Zach Lavine could very well want to stay. He could. But ultimately, the front office, they can still move him too, depending on how they want this thing to pan out for the foreseeable future. Because right now it seems like the Bulls are still in that weird spot. Yes, we've had some fun moments. Yes, we've had some great moments and some decent performances from these players on the Chicago Bulls. But let's keep it real. After watching some of the fun, it gets really bad. More specifically in second quarters. You know what I'm saying? Spamming threes. The play style gets a little bit shaky. You know what I mean? To the point to where my man's Kendall Gill called out the Chicago Bulls simply for shooting 53s in a game. Pretty much going off and saying, look, y'all not the Boston Celtics. And I'm with them. Because when those three-point shots are falling, it looks good. But there has to be some grown man on the basketball court or somebody with a IQ to say, hey, we ain't scored in 5 minutes. Let's try to attack the basket now. Let's try to get something in the paint. Let's try to be a little bit more aggressive so we can end up at the foul line. So those are some of the things that you think about with the whole makeup of the squad. But back to Zach Lavine, are we really surprised? I'm not. I'm not surprised that teams are still pushing away at the idea of Zach Lavine. Well, I will say maybe a little bit surprised because you can potentially acquire an all-star caliber player for your team. I know that's going to affect some of the GMs, you know what I'm saying, bottom line, or kind of restrict them to kind of, plan for the future or acquire more talent to build a more legitimate championship contender. But for me, I would still take the chance. But I do understand the reluctancy from most of these GMs for sure. But you guys let me know how you all are feeling about the whole Zach Lavine stuff and still hearing nothing. Crickets, complete silence when it comes to Zach Lavine on that trade market. Now, before we get up out of here, we got to talk about Montes Buzelis. My man's Montes Buzelis has been one of the bright spots for the Chicago Bulls this season, and I've been truly excited to see this young fella play. He has been bad. This is why we sit here and we bang on the desk and tell Billy Donovan to give this young fella more time. Give him more time. I think in the game yesterday versus the Sixers, he played 13 consecutive minutes, and I'm with it. This is a young fella. Let him get his feet dirty. Let him get some elbow grease on. Let him get a little stench to the uniform. Because he, you know what I'm saying? Because he actually out there working out. Don't send him, Billy Donovan, don't send him out there for 4 minutes for a small sprint. We don't need that. We need more 15, 20 minutes a game. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? And it all depends on matchups, of course, but we need to see more Montes Buzelis. And after the game, it was reported that Paul George told this young fella, "You're going to be special. Keep at it." And Montes Buzelis said, "It was cool. On the court, I'm not friends with anybody." I talked to him after a little. He told me to keep pushing. You're special. Just keep moving. Montes Buzelis went on to say, and quote, "It means a lot. I try to instill his game into my workouts, and I try to emulate what he does on the court." You tell me, if Montes Buzelis could be a PG type, hey, that's a win for the Chicago Bulls. I'm talking, and if we, I think Montes Buzelis got a mentality that can absolutely place him as a superstar in the foreseeable future. But obviously it's going to have to be on him. It's going to have to be a collaborative effort from him, his coaching staff, and the GM on how they build this team out, whether it be for him or, you know what I'm saying, or to have him a part of that, you know what I'm saying? And him trying to emulate Paul George, I'm not mad at it. Paul George was a monster on defense, still is. And can score on all three levels. Regardless of the playoff stuff, we can remember a time to where Paul George, in the early parts of his career, went toe-to-toe with the Miami Heat in the Eastern Conference Finals. Toe-to-toe. You telling me Montes Buzelis can potentially have us in the Eastern Conference Finals or at least in the playoffs going past the first round? And Montes Buzelis is the lead guy? I'm just saying, that's a bright future. But we can't bank off a lot of hope right now in Chicago. I keep it a buck with you. We are going to have to see it. Him put it on wax. I'm happy that he wants to emulate Paul George. That is not a bad player to try to emulate. I just hope that we can continue to see this young player grow. I believe he has superstar potential. I really, really do. And it starts up top because his mentality says I could be a superstar. But obviously, it's going to have to come down to him. It's going to have to come down to him being healthy. It's going to have to come down to Billy Donovan saying to hell with the politics on who getting paid the most on this team. Montes Buzelis is going to give us the best opportunity to win games. Eventually, that's going to have to come to it. But that is it for me today, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate y'all for sticking around this long. Before you get out of here, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. The mailbag line is open, so call in if you want to go ahead and be a part of a mailbag episode. Leave anything. Let's talk about Chicago Bulls, and make sure you include your name. The number to do so is 773-242-9219. Thank y'all so much. Make sure you always see red, and you already know I'm going to catch y'all on the next one for sure.
Cognac. Gang.